draw, but I'm also going to talk with two lawyers who are who work for the Reporters Committee, and this is Sunshine Week. If you don't know what that is, we'll tell you about it in just a second. But the Reporters Committee has been around since the 70s, right? And it's an organization that helps. Well, I'll read it. The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press is a leading pro bono legal services organization for journalists. They provide resources, training, and support to journalists and media lawyers across the U.S. And I have two of those lawyers here who actually do work to help journalists. And one of them is Adam Marshall, and the other is Gunita Singh. And hello, you guys. Are you there?
Yes.
Hello.
Hi. I can't see you, but you can see me. And I assume that our audience can see you. Let's see. Hi, Yassine. Hi, Pablo. Pablo, can you see all three people? Pablo works for HAPS, and he's there to help us troubleshoot if there's problems. Yeah, he says, welcome to you guys. Can you see the stream of comments, Adam and Anita?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah,
you're welcome. So Pablo says, let me come in and help direct it as well. Okay, great. Thank you, Pablo. So let's see. Then the Reporters Committee, I'll read what's written here, was founded in 1970. And I did read that. So let me tell you about Adam. Adam is a senior staff attorney at the Reporters Committee. His work includes litigation in federal and state courts, writing amicus briefs, and training journalists. In 2017, he was named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 in the media category list for his work promoting government transparency, including the development of the FOIA Wiki, which is the free and collaborative resource, updating in real time on the U.S. Federal Freedom of Information Act. And Gunita Singh is a Jack Nelson Dow Jones Foundation Legal Fellow for the Reporters Committee. She works on litigation, policy, and amicus work, primarily around state and federal freedom of information laws, while also helping reporters and news organizations with records requests. Gunita was previously the staff attorney at the government transparency organization, Property of the People. That's a great name. Where she used the Freedom of Information Act to acquire thousands of records on matters of public concern in an effort to foster transparency and accountability. So welcome, you guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming on. And what is Sunshine Week? Can you guys tell the audience what that is?
Oh my gosh. Sunshine Week is really, our I don't know, like Mardi Gras, maybe prom, spring break, all rolled into one. It's the week that we celebrate government transparency in the United States. We celebrate it as a function of our democracy, but also as an important function that the reporters and journalists and newsrooms all across the country play in helping keep us informed about what our governments are doing. There are lots of parts of it. We celebrate government transparency successes, but we also use it as an opportunity to point to failures and ways that governments could do better in being transparent to the people that they serve. So there's all kinds of events going on this week all across the United States and sometimes around the world, depending upon where you are. The sunshineweek.org website is a kind of host for all of those. So go check out the calendar there. This year it's pretty great because everything is online. So no matter where you are, you can attend things. There was events today already. There's going to be events tomorrow and really every day this week. So go check them out.
That's great. So it's party time for lawyers. No, I don't want to be flippant. It sounds really important. I mean, most of us in this country think, well, I don't know, really recently in the last 4 years, most of us don't think that we have trouble with freedom of press in this country. You think about other places around the world that have much worse problems, but we do have a lot of problems here. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. A lot of times we hear from journalists through the Reporters Committee hotline. So I'll do a shout out to our hotline, which is staffed 7 days a week by reporters committees reporters committee attorneys to help all members of the news media, whether you're a blogger or a documentary filmmaker or a freelance journalist, or maybe you're a journalist at an established outlet, but you're having trouble getting a response to your FOIA request. Maybe you submitted it 6 months ago and you still haven't gotten a determination from the agency about whether they're going to release the requested records or whether they're going to withhold them, or maybe you received the records but they're heavily redacted and 75% of it is blacked out with a Sharpie, and you want help challenging those withholdings because you think they're improper. So there are all kinds of obstacles that members of the news media face in getting access to government records in particular, but also just with fostering transparency and accountability generally. And so I love working at the Reporters Committee because I love being in a position to try to help all of you guys out there who are trying to get information out there in order to foster, debate about current events, about history, about what's going on and what the government's up to.
Do you ever, I'm going to get to the formal questions in a minute, but I just want to ask you, do you ever, I know you guys are really supportive of cartoonists in that you showcase our work at your annual gala by auctioning them off and do other things with cartoonists, but do you ever have to work with cartoonists in your lawyer work, in your freedom of expression work?
That's an interesting question. Not so much in the public records work. I think we're mostly the beneficiaries of cartoonists when it comes to public records work, because they're able to illustrate the absurdity of government secrecy much better than we can in our briefs. But certainly we are supportive of cartoonists, and cartoonists, have been responsible for or been involved in so many really fundamental free expression cases throughout the years. And I think it is one of the hallmarks really of press freedom in America, the expansive rights that we afford to cartoonists as being a really important part of our debate and our political life here. So, again, not so much maybe on the public records side, but certainly, it's very near and dear to our hearts as believers in the First Amendment.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult time for cartoonists because newspapers are dying, but we're hanging in there. Let's see. Hi, Gary Price. Timothy Snyder talks about this often, says Blue. I don't know who is Timothy Snyder. You guys know? Anyway, so let me ask you one of the questions that we had set up for you, and then I'm going to turn the camera around and draw as you're talking. Can each of you talk about freedom of information and the different laws the public and journalists have at their disposal?
Yeah, so we've got the Federal Freedom of Information Act, which is mine and Adam's bread and butter. We live it and breathe it every day. The federal FOIA provides a statutory right of access to records in the possession, custody, or control of federal executive branch agencies. So when we're thinking of those, what represents the quintessential bureaucracy of the federal government, right? We're thinking of the DOJ, the State Department, the EPA, the USDA. These are all executive branch agencies that are subject to the federal FOIA. So any record housed by one of these agencies, whether it is a physical piece of paper or a text message or an email or even an audio clip or a piece of video, constitutes a record that can be disclosed under FOIA. And it's really exciting that it's such a wide spectrum of media that's available, because we work with documentary filmmakers from time to time who need those video clips for their upcoming documentary film. We work with journalists who, will need that 8,000 page document dump, and they'll get it in PDFs and they'll do Control F for the subject that they're most interested in so they can do their reporting. So a wide spectrum of media available through the Federal Freedom of Information Act. Now, of course, it's a great ideal, but as I mentioned earlier when I was alluding to some of those delays and obstacles, the federal FOIA has 9 exemptions to disclosure, which actually, you know, I'll touch on the state public records laws in a moment, but nine exemptions isn't too many. Some of the state public records laws have dozens of exemptions, but under the federal FOIA, let's say some of the records that you're seeking implicate personal privacy, or maybe disclosure of the records would interfere with an ongoing law enforcement investigation. Those are some classic examples of FOIA exemptions that we sometimes see journalists running into. But yeah, the FOIA, the federal FOIA has been around since 1966. So it's been a minute, but we're still ironing out those kinks, and we're still trying to manifest the ideal administration of FOIA. It's definitely seen its ups and downs. But yeah, all 50 states plus DC also have their own public records law, and some of those were modeled off of the federal FOIA, but some of them vary considerably. Like I said before, some of them have far more exemptions. Some of them also cover their state legislatures in addition to the executive branch. Some of them also cover their court systems in addition to the executive branch. And so regardless of whether you are, you know, writing about a national story or local events, there is most likely a public records law at your disposal that you can take advantage of.
Good to know. Mark, sorry. Do you have anything to add, Adam?
Gunita, I think, covered it really well. You know, there are some other transparency laws or concepts that apply to different types of records as well. So when you're talking about court records, we have the First Amendment and the common law. And then you get to legislative branch transparency, which I know you're drawing, I think, the Capitol there in the background.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting subject, because when Congress passed the federal FOIA in the 60s, it only applied it to the executive branch. It did not apply it to itself. And so there's been a lot of discussion, in particular in the last few weeks, about whether there needs to be greater transparency when it comes to law enforcement entities like the Capitol Police, because they're not subject to FOIA. They're part of Congress. There are some laws, like the common law, that journalists are now using to try to get access to some of the Capitol Police records. A lawsuit was filed about that just recently. But I think it's raising the issue of, you know, shouldn't there be more transparency for all branches of government? So it really does depend which branch you're talking about and which level of government you're talking about, what kinds of laws apply.
And why is government transparency and public accessibility so important?
Oh my gosh.
We could go on and on. You set the stage.
I mean, at its core, government transparency laws are a necessary prerequisite to have a democratic government at all. These transparency laws give us the right to know what our government is up to. And we can't have any kind of informed debate or informed discussion or proposed changes to what's going on if we don't know what's going on in the first place. So these laws really are at the bedrock of our conception of democracy in the United States. And they have incredible applications in particular instances too. Gunita, maybe you can talk about some of them. I mean, so there's this kind of background, very lofty ideals, but they have real world consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. Liza, when you were introducing us just a few minutes ago, you mentioned that you liked the name of the organization I used to work at. That organization is called Property of the People. And the reason that we chose that name for the organization is because there's a court case that has some, and I should know which case it was, but it has some wonderful language in it that says the records of the government are the property of the people. And that's why people are entitled to reclaim those records in a sense. And so, you know, Adam and I feel very strongly that government records belong to the people. They belong to the public and the press because we are privileged to be able to live in a democracy. And yes, we are absolutely still manifesting the ideal version of what that should look like. But as Adam said, freedom of information is a bedrock of that. I have the right as a citizen to understand the operations and activities of government, to understand what my taxpayer dollars are being spent on. And access to public records allows me to attribute greater context to the decisions that I may read about in the news. You know, if I get a public record that explains, you know, why the government made a particular decision, who the government consulted in arriving at that particular decision, did the government, you know, anticipate the consequences of making that particular decision? Public records can be so illuminating in terms of understanding the multifaceted nature of government decision making, and it's so rewarding to be able to play a small part in helping members of the news media acquire those records in order to foster the sort of engaged and informed public debate that I know our founders contemplated when they set up our system of government.
That's actually what I was going to ask you, what the founders may have thought about this, if they had thought about it.
Well, I will say that I remember writing this in my cover letter when I applied to the Reporters Committee. I feel very strongly about this one quote by Thomas Jefferson, and I'm a big proponent of taking historical figures with a grain of salt. But I love this quote. He said that information is the currency of democracy. And I think it's just so true. You can't have a robust and strong and healthy democracy without the free flow of information. But I'm going to stop nerding out and let Adam chime in as well.
Well, it reminds me of the Washington Post logo, democracy dies in darkness, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I'll tell you a few of the cases that the Reporters Committee has worked on over the last few years in particular. We've been focused on some troubling practices of the federal government where they have been impersonating journalists in the investigative context. So the FBI a few years ago was trying to catch what they thought was a bomb suspect, someone who was making threats about a high school out in Washington State. And the FBI pretended to be an AP editor and sent messages to this individual and was able to basically deploy a computer worm on their computer to track them. But we think that this practice is hugely damaging to the press because people aren't going to know, you know, when they're talking to a reporter, is this really a reporter that I can talk to and trust to inform the public, or is it an undercover law enforcement agent? There was another instance where the FBI impersonated a documentary film crew. They created this whole fake company called Longbow Productions, and they pretended to be making a documentary film to try to get in and interview people. And
wasn't that a subject of a movie, Adam? Wasn't that
a
subject of a movie? Yeah.
Yes, there are a couple documentary films about it, including No Man's Land and I'm forgetting the name of the other one. They're both excellent documentaries. I highly recommend them to everyone. But you know, again, really troubling that law enforcement is impersonating legitimate members of the news media. And potentially putting, you know, reporters at risk. So we've been doing a lot of work in our FOIA litigation to try to figure out, you know, what's going on there. And we've gotten a lot of records that have illuminated the scope of the issue and its particular use in different practices. But it's not just these kind of high level things that FOIA is useful for. I was reminded the other day of this really excellent series of reports that USA Today did on the legacy of heavy metal plants all across the country. They were able to use public records laws to figure out where these, you know, metal smelters and all other kinds of things were back in the day. And then they were able to figure out, well, what's there now? And they were able to show that there were, housing projects built on top of these old plants. There were children's playgrounds that were built on top of these places. And then they sent people out to do sample testing, and they found dangerous stuff in the soil. So it's not just about protecting democracy or protecting, the rights of journalists. It's also about things as basic as like what's in the soil in your kid's playground. So these have really serious real world consequences.
We have a question from Brett Walker from California. Hi, Brett. Good to see you here. Should the media feel any need to protect the release of information which could be damaging to national interests, or is that an outmoded journalistic concept?
So reporters, are always thinking about that when they are writing a story, particularly if it, concerns national security. It is an ethics question and not a legal question. And we deal on the legal side of things. We deal with trying to get the reporters the information. But they are, of course, thinking about, whether publishing a particular story would or would not, advance the public interest. That's pretty core to journalistic ethics.
Mm-hmm. See if there are any other questions. Anybody have any questions? I have some more to ask you too. Hi, Helen from Edinburgh. Let's see. Any other questions from the viewers? Thanks, guys, for joining us. Blue says that Timothy Snyder is a historian who wrote the popular short book on tyranny, which I don't know. Thank you, Pablo, for the award, and Yassine. People can give people awards on HAPS. I don't know if you know that, guys, Adam and Anika. So let's see. What has the Reporters Committee been working on in the freedom of information space lately? Maybe you've covered some of that.
Yeah, I'll give an example of an amicus brief that we just filed on Friday, just a few days ago. And, Adam, I think Adam mentioned, freedom of information has tangible, real world consequences in addition to the lofty theoretical ideas that I was just lecturing about a couple seconds ago. And I think the amicus brief that we filed just a few days ago on Friday really highlights that. This is a case in Wisconsin where the State Department of Health was planning on releasing the names of local businesses in the state of Wisconsin where the employees had suffered outbreaks of COVID-19. And there's obviously such a strong public interest in that information. We've all had to adjust the decisions that we're making during the pandemic. What time do I go to the grocery store? Where am I going to go out to eat, if at all? Where can I safely gather with my friends and family? We've all had to kind of be really intentional and vigilant, just in terms of negotiating these everyday basic decisions. And having all of the information that you possibly can at your disposal, it's indispensable in terms of helping people to get through this pandemic as safely and effectively as possible, so we can emerge, on the other side of this. But some interest groups in the state of Wisconsin were trying to block disclosure of those records, claiming that it would be harmful to the reputation of local businesses. But we at the Reporters Committee argued that the public interest in disclosure far outweighs any nebulous, speculations of reputational harm. People need this information in order to make educated choices, and that's one of the key reasons why public records laws exist. So I think that's one, tangible example of some of the work that we've been doing that can have an impact on everyday people.
That's great. Foggy asks, how safe do you feel today versus 5 years ago to write the real facts? I guess that's a question for the journalists. Foggy?
Yeah, I mean, so we're lawyers, not journalists. But I will say that there have been more arrests of journalists here in the United States over the last few years, than we've seen in a long time. If you're interested in this, there's a great resource that the Reporters Committee helps contribute to. It's called the Press Freedom Tracker. and it tracks instances of interference with press freedom in the United States specifically. And we do reports and analysis based off the data that's collected there. And we put that out in reports. And you can certainly see over the last few years a real concern on behalf of a lot of people about the state of press freedom in the United States. I'm hopeful that some of that is going to change now, at least with respect to federal law enforcement entities. We've been involved in writing more amicus briefs with respect to the situation out in Portland, Oregon. There was a bunch of law enforcement, federal law enforcement there that was interfering with journalists, and in some instances even doing things that were causing them physical harm. And we were supportive of a group of journalists there who were successfully able to get the court to order the federal government to stop doing that. And it now seems like there's movement on the part of the parties there to tone things down. So we're certainly glad to see that. But the last few years have posed real unique and unusual challenges that we've not seen before through report.
Why is it different than it was, or is it just we're seeing it more clearly, or what's changed in the last 30 years since Reporters Committee was founded? 50 years since the Reporters Committee was founded?
I mean, I think in the last administration you had rhetoric from the president that really set the tone. All the way, down through state and local government, that the press was the enemy of the people. And they're not the enemy of the people, far from it. They are, responsible for and spend every day doing the best they can to ensure that the American people knows what's going on and ensuring really our democratic way of life in the United States. But I do think that rhetoric from the president was really, really quite different and damaging.
Yeah. And he did it before he was elected. He was starting it back then.
Yep.
Let's see, other questions here. Helen asks or says, as a photographer, it concerns me being stopped from photographing in public places when it's perfectly legal to do so. Oh, you have been, Helen. That's interesting. So you joined the NUJ for this specific reason. I know photographers who have had camera equipment broken and that's been manhandled, which is unlawful here in the UK. Okay, you're in the UK. Sorry, Helen, I missed that. Any comment, you guys? National Union of Journalists here in the UK. Interesting.
So I'm not familiar with that group, but in the United States, fortunately, we do have the First Amendment that in this context, many courts have said specifically protects the right of the press and the public to, for example, document the activities of law enforcement personnel, especially in public spaces. So, all of the videos that have consumed our public debate over the summer and before that, with respect to law enforcement using violence against persons of color here in the United States or killing them. All of those videos and photographs are protected by and made possible because of our First Amendment. And that's something that we believe very strongly in. But in the UK, it is different. I can't speak to that. I'm not an expert on that, unfortunately.
Let's see, we have another question from my sheet of questions. What is some of the best public records reporting and acts of journalism you've seen recently?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think, going back to COVID, and I'm forgetting the outlet that published this, but I remember the story. Our FOIA was one of the tools that was used to reveal draft press statements circulating within the Trump administration, in which plans were contemplated wherein the U.S. Postal Service would have sent a handful of masks to each household within the United States, but for some reason the plan never evolved to fruition. So I thought that one was particularly striking. and I remember that FOIA was also a critical tool that prompted the CDC to release data showing that Latina and Latino and African American residents within the US had been, I want to say, 3 times as likely to contract COVID-19 than non-persons of color. So there's been a lot of hard-hitting and poignant and just absolutely critical reporting about the toll of COVID-19 over the last year.
Fascinating.
There's a really great Twitter feed called at FOIA feed, like FOIAFEED. And it just tweets out all kinds of stories that are made possible by public records. And it is shocking how many stories rely on public records for crucial information that the public needs to know. I follow it religiously. I think it's a great resource because oftentimes it's the type of kind of nerdy thing that you might not realize is responsible for really groundbreaking stories.
Yeah, I see it's in the feed now. Your colleague at Reporters Committee put it in the feed. There's a lot of interesting links there in the feed from the Reporters Committee from Anna. Thank you, Anna. What else? Do you guys have anything else you want to share with the viewers? If you guys are just joining us, we're talking to the 2 lawyers from the Reporters Committee, which is an organization that helps with freedom of expression and freedom of press issues in this country. And they're here to answer your questions. If you have any questions, we're going to stay on a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Do you guys have anything else to say? Anything to add?
I would just want to plug our resources for a second. You know, we've got a comprehensive open government guide available on the Reporters Committee website for how to use state and local public records laws. And I'm not sure, I know Adam gave a shout out to the FOIA wiki on the Instagram live, but I'm not sure if we got a chance to plug the FOIA wiki here, but that's foia.wiki. And it will be your North Star throughout navigating the FOIA process, whether you're a novice to FOIA or whether you're an old hat at FOIA. The FOIA wiki, I'm on it at least once a day, and it just contains a wealth of information about the ins and outs of the FOIA process, from the legislative history, in case you want to nerd out on some legislative history, to tangible tips for overcoming, you know, exemptions and challenging redactions of public records. So we've got a lot of great resources available for you. So please take advantage of them.
That's great to know. That's great to know. Yep. Thank you, Pablo. Just put that link up, the wiki, FOIA wiki page. What else? Well, anything, Adam, do you have anything to add?
No, I just encourage, everyone to take advantage of these laws. If you have a question, if you're seeking, information from the government, try it out. You don't need to be a lawyer. You don't need to be an expert to submit a public records request. Anyone can do it. And I think everyone should do it because it tells you a lot about how our government works. It helps you be an engaged citizen or an engaged member of your community. And you never know, you might find out something really interesting along the way. So these are your rights, and they need to be utilized in order to be fresh, in order to be effective. And so I would just encourage everyone to learn a little bit more about what they can do under the law. And like Liza said, we have all kinds of resources that can help you do that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I'm so glad I know about you guys now. Well, thank you for joining me. I'll show you the drawing I did. I did just a Capitol building with the sunshine over it.
I love it.
It's so
I
good.
did another one earlier with a commentary, but I think I kept it simple this time. So
Thanks
thank
for
you guys
sharing.
for joining. Sorry?
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I think it's really been interesting, and I'm really glad to know about the Reporters Committee now. Nice to meet you both, and thanks for joining us here on HAPS. And keep up the good work. We really appreciate what you guys are doing. I know I do.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. And have a good week. Happy Sunshine Week. Oh, it's Sunshine Week, everybody.
Oh, yes.
Happy
have a good
sunshine.
week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.